Welcome to Wisdom for the Present, where we take ancient truth and bring it into clear modern understanding. This episode uses AI-generated narration based on human-researched and written material. I was thinking about how we usually try to diagnose a problem. Like, it feels very much like an engineering issue or something.
Right, yeah, like fixing a machine or following a manual.
Exactly. Like, if you break your arm, you get an x-ray, and the doctor points to that jagged white line and says, well, there it is. Put a cast on it for 6 weeks. It is incredibly straightforward and clean.
Oh, for sure. It is entirely binary, which I think makes it very comforting for the human brain.
Yeah.
I mean, we are wired to categorize things like that. We want our problems to be visible and localized and solvable with just a simple linear protocol.
Right, but the moment you step out of that realm, the moment you step out of orthopedics and into the world of human psychology or deep interpersonal trauma, or even just preparing for ultimate loss, well, that x-ray machine is just utterly useless.
Yeah, it really is. You are suddenly looking at a landscape that is profoundly murky.
Completely murky. We are forced to navigate the messy realities of existential fear and power dynamics and the anticipation of grief. And just figure out how a person actually survives when their entire world feels like it is spinning out of control.
Which is terrifying for most people.
It really is. And that brings us directly to the mission of our deep dive today. We're looking at a collection of texts often called the Farewell Discourse of Jesus. This is found in the book of John, spanning chapters 13 through 17. And I have to say, this material is incredibly dense.
Dense is a good word for it, yeah.
It is intimate. And to be honest, it is deeply poignant because it is fundamentally a conversation about an ending.
It is. And to really grasp the gravity of these 5 chapters, we have to start by completely immersing ourselves in the historical and human context of that specific night. Because if we do not understand the tension in the room, then the philosophy just sounds kind of abstract.
Right. It just sounds like nice religious poetry.
Exactly. So picture the geopolitical reality here. It is the evening of the Passover festival in first century Jerusalem. The population of the city has swelled massively with pilgrims.
Like hundreds of thousands of people.
Yes, a massive influx. And the Roman garrison, which is stationed right next to the temple in the Antonia fortress, is on super high alert. Because Passover is essentially a celebration of Jewish liberation from a previous empire. So riots were really common.
Right. They are literally celebrating the overthrow of an oppressor while currently being occupied by another oppressor.
Exactly. The air in the city, and certainly the air in the upper room where the supper is taking place, is just thick with an unspoken volatile tension.
And the disciples, the 12 closest followers of Jesus, they are operating under a massive, almost tragic misunderstanding of what is about to happen. They're looking at the crowds that welcomed Jesus into the city days earlier, and they are doing the math.
Oh yeah, they are definitely doing the math.
They are still expecting an earthly, temporal kingdom. They are anticipating a military messiah who will finally trigger the uprising, overthrow the Roman occupation, and set up a physical throne in Jerusalem.
That is the crucial disconnect right there. I mean, in their minds, they are not attending a farewell dinner. They are attending a pre-victory banquet.
Oh, wow. Yeah, a pre-victory banquet.
Yeah. They are likely looking around the table, calculating their own political capital. They are thinking about cabinet positions. Like, who gets to be the equivalent of the Secretary of Defense? Who gets the Treasury? They're operating purely on the metrics of worldly power and status.
Right. And instead of handing out promotions or detailing a tactical assault on the Roman guards, Jesus uses these final precious hours to do something completely baffling to them. He is preparing them for his own execution.
Which is the last thing they expect.
Totally the last thing. He is preparing them for the complete collapse of their immediate worldly hopes for future persecution and for an entirely different kind of spiritual mission. The text tells us that he knows his hour has come to depart out of this world. He knows that one of the men at that very table, Judas, has already made the deal to betray him to the authorities.
The shadow of the cross is literally in the room with them.
It really is. And yet the narrative notes that having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. He spends his final hours meticulously equipping them to survive the psychological and spiritual earthquake that is about to hit.
Which is why this text remains so enduringly relevant for you, the listener. What Jesus provides here isn't a 10-step checklist for immediate circumstantial success. He did not offer them a way to avoid the trauma.
No, he definitely does not.
Instead, he offers a complete rewiring of how they view reality itself. He's about to systematically subvert every underlying assumption they hold about what power looks like, what love demands, and where true peace actually originates.
And that rewiring is what we are here to extract for you. Because whether you are navigating a toxic corporate hierarchy, or dealing with a sudden personal tragedy, or facing crippling anxiety about the economy or your future, or just trying to maintain your sanity in a chaotic culture, the fundamental human condition has not shifted an inch since that night in Jerusalem.
Not an inch. The questions are identical.
Right. Like, how do we lead without becoming tyrants? How do we handle betrayal? How do we endure the painful phases of our lives without growing bitter?
And the way the text answers those questions begins not with a philosophical lecture, but with a profoundly disruptive physical action. If we move into chapter 13, we see what is arguably one of the most stunning subversions of social hierarchy in recorded history.
Let us set that scene, because the contrast the writer builds here is just brilliant. Supper is underway, and the writer of John makes a very specific point to establish Jesus' internal state before he makes his move. The text says that Jesus knew that the Father had given all things into his hands and that he came from God and was going to God.
Which is such a massive statement of authority.
Massive. So we are not looking at someone who is experiencing a crisis of confidence. He is at the absolute apex of his self-awareness, his authority, and his understanding of his own divine origin.
Right.
And from that position of ultimate security, what does he do? He stands up from the table, he takes off his outer garments, he grabs a linen towel and ties it around his waist. He pours water into a basin, gets down on his knees, and begins scrubbing the road dirt off the feet of his followers.
To feel the psychological shockwave this sent through the room, we really have to understand the mechanics of first-century hospitality and social stratification.
Right, because to us it is just like, oh, he's washing their feet.
Exactly. But in ancient Palestine, people walked miles every day on unpaved, dusty, animal-trafficked roads, wearing nothing but open leather sandals. By the time you arrived at a banquet, your feet were absolutely filled.
Yeah, they were probably covered in mud and animal waste and everything else.
Yeah, exactly. So washing the feet of guests was a standard requirement of hospitality. But it was strictly, without exception, the task of the absolute lowest person on the social ladder. It was the job of a slave. And not even the highest-ranking slave in the household. It was menial drudgery reserved for the lowest servant.
Right, and in a society structured entirely around honor and shame, doing this voluntarily was just unthinkable. It was not just polite service, it was a degradation of status.
The historical records of the era, from Roman philosophers to Jewish traditions, are very clear about this hierarchy. A disciple might be expected to wash the hands of their rabbi, perhaps, but to wash the feet, that crossed a boundary. So to see the man they revere, the man they call master and Lord, the man they believe is about to be crowned king of Israel, stripped down to the undergarments of a slave and perform this task, it is a complete short-circuiting of their entire worldview.
It is hard to find a perfect modern equivalent because our culture pays so much lip service to servant leadership. We are used to the PR stunt of a CEO deciding to wipe down the conference table after a board meeting.
Right, or the manager pouring coffee for the interns on their first day.
Exactly. But those are highly controlled temporary displays that do not actually threaten the hierarchy. This is fundamentally different. This is the legitimate ruler of a nation performing the absolute most degrading biological cleanup task of a peasant and doing it with intense intimacy.
It is deeply uncomfortable.
And frankly, looking at it through the lens of human psychology, I completely understand Peter's reaction. When Jesus gets around the table to Peter, Peter recoils. He says, "Lord, do you wash my feet?" And then he doubles down with a flat refusal. He says, "You will never wash my feet."
Which is such a typical Peter response.
It really is. And honestly, I think most of us would do the exact same thing. It feels disrespectful to let someone you deeply admire degrade themselves for you. It feels like a violation of the natural order of things.
It sounds incredibly noble, does it not? It masquerades as deep reverence and humility. But when we dig into the underlying mechanisms of what Peter's actually doing, a very different picture emerges.
Okay, so what is he actually doing?
Well, Peter is not protecting Jesus' dignity. He is fiercely protecting the power structure itself. By refusing to let Jesus wash his feet, Peter is refusing to submit to Jesus' unconventional inverted paradigm.
Okay, let us unpack that. How does refusing service protect the power structure?
Because if the man at the absolute top of the pyramid is voluntarily taking the position at the absolute bottom, well, the pyramid collapses. And Peter has invested his entire life into climbing that pyramid.
Oh, wow.
Right. If the king is a foot washer, what does that mean for the king's right-hand man? It means Peter's aspirations of sitting on a throne judging the tribes of Israel just got traded for a towel and the basin of dirty water.
That is wild.
Peter's refusal is essentially him saying, I know how reality is supposed to work better than you do. I know what power looks like, and this isn't it. Put your clothes back on and act like a king so I can act like a lord.
That is a fascinating psychological read. Beneath the surface of, oh no, you shouldn't do that for me, is a rigid, almost desperate clinging to the world's default operating system. Peter is terrified of the implications. If greatness is defined by downward mobility, Peter is totally lost.
And Jesus confronts this resistance head on. He does not coddle Peter's false humility. He looks at him and says, if I do not wash you, you have no part with me.
That is a profound boundary to set.
It is. Jesus is stating that if Peter isn't willing to let go of his preconceived notions of dignity, status, and power, if he isn't willing to receive grace in this incredibly vulnerable, paradigm-shattering way, he literally cannot participate in the community Jesus is building.
Right. The admission ticket to this new kingdom is allowing your pride to be dismantled.
Exactly. And true to Peter's extreme personality, the moment he realizes his connection to Jesus is on the line, he swings wildly in the opposite direction.
He always goes to the extreme.
Always. He says, Lord, not my feet only, but also my hands and my head. He is suddenly demanding a full bath right there in the dining room.
Which is such a deeply human, relatable reaction.
It is. But it allows Jesus to transition the physical act into a deeper spiritual mechanic. He tells Peter that someone who is bathed only needs their feet washed to be completely clean. In the context of that culture, you would take a full bath at a public bathhouse before heading to a banquet.
Right, so your body is clean.
Yes, you were clean. But walking from the bathhouse to the host's home, your sandaled feet would inevitably pick up the dust of the road. Jesus is using this to explain the mechanics of spiritual renewal. He is saying your core commitment, the fundamental direction of your life, is already established. You are bathed. But as you walk through the daily dusty reality of a corrupt world, you're going to constantly pick up the grime of daily life.
Like the resentments and the small compromises and the ego hits and all the anxieties.
Exactly. You do not need to rebuild your entire foundation every day,
Right.
But you absolutely need this daily, humble cleansing.
And you know, the most staggering mechanism of this entire scene is who actually receives that cleansing. The text is painfully explicit. It notes that the devil had already put it into the heart of Judas Iscariot to betray him.
Yes.
Jesus is fully aware that Judas is actively conspiring to have him killed. He knows the price has been negotiated. And yet when Jesus works his way around that table, he does not skip Judas.
No, he does not.
He kneels down, takes the dusty feet of the man who is about to sell him to a Roman execution squad, and gently washes them. It defies every basic survival instinct embedded in our biology.
It really is the ultimate visual apologetic.
Yeah.
It destroys the concept of merit-based love. Now, later in history, some institutions missed the broader point. There were early communities, like the church in Milan, that tried to institutionalize this by making literal foot washing a mandatory sacrament.
Right, like a scheduled church service event.
Yeah. But the enduring mechanism Jesus was imparting was not about adding a new physical ritual to the calendar. He explicitly tells them the application. He says, if I then, the Lord and the teacher, have washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet. For I have given you an example that you also should do, just as I have done to you. He is establishing an entirely new economy of power where status is completely detached from dominance and entirely attached to mutual selfless service.
So if you look at your own life right now, your workplace chart, your family dynamic, your social circles, the challenge here is intensely practical. Who are you actively serving? Not who are you mentoring from a distance or who are you throwing money at, but who are you stooping down to serve? Especially those who hold absolutely no social capital to repay you. True leadership based on the mechanics of this text is an absolute inversion. It is not measured by how many people you can command. It's measured by how much of your own dignity you are willing to spend for the benefit of someone else.
And that radical dignity-spending act of service is the necessary prerequisite for the core rule of this community that Jesus drops in the very same chapter. Because you cannot wash someone's feet if you are too obsessed with your own ego to love them.
Which moves us perfectly into the next massive paradigm shift. After Judas finally leaves the room to set the betrayal in motion, Jesus gives the remaining disciples what he explicitly calls a new commandment. He says, a new commandment I give to you, that you love one another. Just as I have loved you, you also love one another. By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples if you have love for one another.
Right.
Now, looking at this analytically, my immediate pushback is on the word new. I mean, the concept of loving your neighbor is an ancient idea. It is written plainly in the book of Leviticus centuries earlier. It is the golden rule. So what is the actual mechanism here that makes this a completely new piece of technology for human relations?
It is a vital question. If you examine the historical evolution of Jewish law, the mandate to love your neighbor definitely did exist. However, over the centuries, through various interpretations and cultural pressures, it had become buried under layers of sectarianism and legal loopholes and justified retaliation. The religious teachers of the day had spent a lot of time defining who did not qualify as a neighbor.
Ah, okay. Finding the loophole.
Exactly. Jesus reintroduces the concept, but he upgrades the operating system in two highly specific ways. First, it is new in its baseline standard. The old standard was love your neighbor as yourself. The new standard is love one another as I have loved you.
And considering he just washed the feet of his betrayer and is fully aware he is hours away from allowing himself to be tortured to death for their benefit, that is a wildly different standard.
Night and day difference.
Yeah, I mean, loving someone as yourself usually just means treating them with basic decency and fairness, right? Treating them how you would prefer to be treated. But loving someone as I have loved you demands a willingness to absorb their worst behavior and still proactively seek their ultimate good. It is the difference between common courtesy and agonizing sacrifice.
And that leads to the second reason it is entirely new. Its function as an identity marker. In antiquity, groups distinguished themselves through highly visible external markers. The philosophical schools of the Greeks were known by their specific rhetorical arguments and adherence to certain logic.
Right.
Religious factions like the Pharisees were known by their rigid adherence to external purity laws, specific garments, or visible fasting practices. A Roman legion was known by its standard and its armor. Jesus strips all of that away. He is essentially saying, my followers will not be identified by a specific diet, a geographical location, a political affiliation, or a specialized uniform. The sole distinguishing badge of your belonging to me is this radical self-sacrificing love for each other.
That is an astronomically high bar. And honestly, it highlights one of the most uncomfortable obstacles when we look at the modern landscape. If you look at large ideological groups today, or specifically the modern Christian world, they are so frequently known by the public for the exact opposite of this.
Unfortunately, yeah.
They're often recognized for bitter division, for immense pride, for intense vitriolic debates over hyper-specific dogmas, or for tying themselves to a particular political party. They are rarely recognized universally by an outsider for an unnatural, unified love.
It is a very stark contrast to what was commanded.
And let's be fair, the psychological difficulty of actually executing this is immense. Loving people who are inherently flawed, people who have vastly different personalities, people who actively annoy you, or loving someone who has the capacity to betray you, that completely overrides our evolutionary drive for self-preservation.
It absolutely overrides it. It requires short-circuiting the brain's threat detection system. The true application of this wisdom requires a community to actively surmount deep-seated human distinctions, whether that is country of origin, economic rank, educational background, or political leaning.
Right.
It requires looking at another human being and recognizing a shared vulnerability and a shared need for grace that supersedes any temporary tribal identity. When a community actually functions this way, it is so historically and sociologically rare that it stops outsiders in their tracks.
So if you evaluate your own immediate circles, your startup team, your neighborhood association, your church, your friend group, you have to ask a really penetrating diagnostic question. Is your group bound together by a shared hatred of an outgroup? Is the glue holding you together the fact that you all despise the same political figure or complain about the same management team? Or are you bound together by a costly, active, self-denying commitment to the well-being of the people in the room? The text argues that only the latter provides a resilient, true foundation.
But to love at that level, to abandon your self-preservation, requires an immense amount of internal security. You cannot give away your dignity if you are terrified of losing your identity.
Exactly.
And at this exact moment in the narrative, the disciples have zero internal security. Their anxiety is skyrocketing. Jesus has told them he is leaving. Judas has vanished into the night. Jesus has just looked at Peter, the bravest of the bunch, and told him he will deny even knowing Jesus 3 times before the sun comes up. The psychological floor has completely dropped out from beneath them.
They are in free fall.
Yes. The atmosphere in the room has shifted from confusion to an absolute existential panic.
They are looking at the total collapse of their future. And Jesus recognizes the panic. He pivots directly to address their acute physiological anxiety in chapter 14. He says, "Do not let your heart be troubled. Believe in God. Believe also in me. In my Father's house are many homes. I am going to prepare a place for you.
To understand how comforting this would have been, we have to look at the architectural and cultural reality of the ancient Near East. The concept of the Father's house isn't just a metaphor for a big building in the clouds. In that culture, families lived in patrilical compounds.
Okay, so what does that mean exactly?
When a son married, he didn't move away. He simply built another room or dwelling onto his father's existing house. It was an ever-expanding structure of safety provision and intimate family connection.
So when he says many homes or many mansions, he's pulling on their deepest cultural understanding of permanent belonging.
Yes, and from a broader cosmological perspective, he is reframing their view of the universe. The universe isn't a chaotic, terrifying void. It is the vast, structured dwelling place of the Creator.
Wow, that changes everything.
Right. Passing from this temporary earthly life into the next isn't a leap into the dark unknown. It is simply walking through a door from one room of the Father's massive house into another room. Jesus is telling them that his impending death isn't an abandonment. He is acting like an advanced scout, like a traveler going ahead of his companions to secure the lodgings, prepare the fires, and make sure everything is ready for their arrival. He tells them, you know where I'm going, and you know the way.
I love the reassurance there, but we have to talk about Thomas. Thomas is one of my favorite figures in this narrative because he is always the guy willing to state the obvious when everyone else is too intimidated to speak up.
He really is a pragmatist in the room.
He is. All the other disciples are probably nodding along, pretending they grasp the profound mystical metaphor, and Thomas just raises his hand and says, Lord, we literally do not know where you are going. How can we possibly know the way?
It is such an honest admission.
It is, and this honest admission prompts Jesus to make a claim that, frankly, is a massive obstacle for the modern listener. Jesus answers Thomas by saying, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me.
That is the friction point. I know exactly why that hits a modern ear so harshly.
It hits harshly because we live in a highly pluralistic, interconnected 21st century society. We value the synthesis of multiple perspectives. We are deeply suspicious of anyone claiming a monopoly on reality. So when a modern learner hears no one comes to the Father except through me, it sounds incredibly rigid. It sounds exclusionary. It sounds like a bouncer at a VIP club deciding who gets past the velvet rope based on arbitrary criteria.
Right.
How does a listener process this without immediately throwing up a defensive wall?
We process it by deeply analyzing the context of the conversation and the mechanism of what Jesus is actually offering. Look at the immediate situation. The disciples are terrified. They are wandering in a psychological dark wood. They are facing imminent trauma and persecution. They don't need a comparative philosophy seminar right then. They need a survival mechanism.
Okay, that makes sense.
If you are lost in a dense, hostile jungle and a local guide who knows the terrain intimately says, I am the only safe path out of here, follow my steps exactly, you do not argue about pluralism. You recognize that the exclusivity of the path is what makes it reliable.
The exclusivity isn't an insult to other paths. It is a guarantee of safety. He isn't handing them a complex topographic map and saying, figure it out yourself. He is saying, I am the map. I embody the path.
Precisely. And to build on that, consider the specific words he uses. He claims to be the truth. In a world dominated by the shadows of political spin, religious hypocrisy, and subjective human opinions, he is offering himself as the perfect, uncorrupted representation of ultimate reality.
Which is something we all desperately want.
Exactly. He claims to be the life. He isn't offering a new set of rules to try and force a dead system to work. He is offering a direct connection to the source of vitality. Humanity historically has a terrible track record of navigating its own way out of darkness. Our willpower is flawed. Our internal compass is constantly skewed by our egos. Coming to the Father through him means abandoning our flawed navigation systems and relying entirely on his merits, his guidance, and his ultimate sacrifice.
So instead of viewing it as a wall built to keep people out, it is better understood as a singular, perfectly tuned frequency that actually cuts through the overwhelming static of the world. He is telling Thomas, stop looking for an abstract philosophy. Look at me. Watch how I touch the leper. Watch how I respond to the Pharisees. Watch how I forgive my executioners. That is the way.
And the application for us today is profoundly clarifying. When your mind is racing at 2 a.m, when you are overwhelmed by the complexity of your future, what map are you trying to read? Are you trying to forge your own path through sheer willpower and endless anxiety? Are you trying to carry the weight of determining your own ultimate reality? Or are you willing to surrender your navigation to the one who has already successfully walked the path through suffering and death into life?
That reframing really shifts the feeling from exclusion to deep relief, but it creates an immediate severe logistical problem for the guys sitting in that room. If Jesus is the only reliable map, the only way out of the jungle, how on earth are they supposed to follow him if he physically leaves? They are losing the map.
It seems like a massive paradox.
Yeah, and this tension is the catalyst for the next massive conceptual leap in the discourse. We see the promise of the ultimate internal upgrade.
Jesus realizes they are grieving this impending loss, and he tells them something that biologically and psychologically must have sounded like absolute madness to them. In chapter 16, he looks at these terrified men and says, "It is to your advantage that I go away."
Think about the weight of that statement. The person they love most, the man who has protected them, fed them, and guided them for years, is telling them, you are actually going to be better off without my physical body here.
Right.
If I am John or Peter, my immediate thought is, we are absolutely not better off. We can barely understand your simplest parables when you're sitting right in front of us explaining them. The religious authorities want us dead. The Romans are armed to the teeth. Do not leave us. How does he possibly justify this as an advantage?
He justifies it by introducing a new mechanism of operation. He says, "For if I don't go away, the counselor won't come to you. But if I go, I will send him to you." The Greek word used here in the original text is Paraclete. To understand the sheer magnitude of what Jesus is promising, we have to look at the etymology and the cultural usage of that word in ancient Greek and Roman society. It is a massive, multi-layered concept. It translates to advocate, helper, comforter, or monitor.
Let us dig into the advocate aspect first, because that sounds very much like legal terminology to me.
It is entirely legal terminology. In the Greco-Roman legal system, you didn't hire a defense attorney the way we do today. If you were dragged into court, you would call upon a paraclete. This was usually a powerful patron, a person of immense standing, wisdom, and authority.
Okay, so what did they actually do in court?
Well, they wouldn't necessarily argue the case for you. They would physically stand beside you. Their presence alone provided weight, aided your cause, and gave you the courage to speak. Jesus says this Spirit will reprove the world of sin about righteousness and about judgment. The Spirit will act as a prosecuting attorney against the corrupt systems of the world, presenting the evidence, silencing the adversaries, and bringing profound conviction to the human conscience. But the Paraclete isn't just legal muscle. It is also a monitor, a teacher who illuminates the mind, bringing past teachings into sharp present focus. And it is a comforter, providing an unshakable consolation in the midst of severe distress.
This is where the technological analogy is just irresistible to me. While Jesus was with them physically, he was bound by the same physical constraints as any human body. He could only be in one place at one time. If he was healing someone in Galilee, he wasn't teaching in Jerusalem.
Exactly. He was localized.
Right. So the disciples were relying on external training wheels. If they had a problem, they had to physically find him, tap him on the shoulder, and ask. Having those training wheels removed feels like a death sentence to them. But what Jesus is explaining is an operational upgrade. He is saying, I am removing the external localized guide, but I am giving you an internal omnipresent gyroscope.
That is an exceptionally accurate way to translate the concept. It is the shift from relying on an external guru to possessing an internalized cognitive and spiritual framework. Jesus tells them that the Spirit of truth lives with you and will be in you. That is why it is advantageous for him to leave. The localized bodily presence of Jesus is being traded for a spirit that can dwell within every single believer in all places across all time zones simultaneously.
It is the ultimate democratization of divine access. You no longer have to make a pilgrimage to a specific temple in Jerusalem or track down a specific prophet in the desert. The advocate, the defense attorney, the gyroscope is installed directly into your own consciousness.
And if you look at the historical record, this internal upgrade is the only logical explanation for the psychological transformation of the disciples. I mean, in this room, they are cowards. Within weeks, these exact same men are standing before the highest religious courts and the most powerful Roman magistrates, speaking with an articulate, fearless boldness that stuns their captors.
They didn't suddenly become legal geniuses, right?
No, they were relying on the Paraclete. The Spirit was bringing to their remembrance everything Jesus had taught, providing them with the exact words to say in the moment of crisis.
The relevance of this for us today is immense. Consider how often we desperately crave an external savior. When our lives or societies get complicated, we look for a political strongman or a charismatic self-help guru or a perfectly optimized productivity app to just hand us the answers and fix the chaos.
Oh, we always want the quick external fix.
We constantly want physical external proof. But the underlying argument of this text is that an internalized connection to the Spirit of truth is a vastly superior, infinitely more resilient way to navigate human existence. When the external world is experiencing an earthquake, the internal gyroscope is what keeps you upright.
But that internal gyroscope doesn't just spin on its own without maintenance. If the goal is to be constantly guided by this internalized spirit, the obvious practical question becomes, how do you maintain the connection? How does a human being keep that signal from degrading over time?
Which leads seamlessly into Jesus' explanation of the mechanics of growth. In chapter 15, he shifts away from legal and architectural metaphors and grounds his explanation in something they understood intimately, agriculture. He introduces the metaphor of the true vine. He says, I am the true vine and my Father is the farmer. Every branch in me that doesn't bear fruit, he takes away. Every branch that bears fruit, he prunes that it may bear more fruit.
First century Judea was an agrarian society, and viticulture, the cultivation of grapevines, was central to their economy and their daily lives. They understood the biology of a vineyard. In this metaphor, the roles are deeply specific. Jesus is the rootstock, the main trunk of the vine. God the Father is the husbandman, the meticulous observant farmer who owns and tends the vineyard. And the disciples, and by extension all followers, are the branches.
Okay.
Now, the fundamental biological purpose of a cultivated grapevine is singular, to produce fruit.
And when we talk about fruit in this context, my modern brain immediately goes to productivity metrics. I think about shipping code, hitting sales KPIs, or expanding a business. But in an ancient agrarian community, what does this fruit actually represent?
In the broader biblical context, bearing fruit means manifesting the character of the internal sap. It means showing by the tangible actions of your life that you are under the influence of the Spirit. It refers to the fruits of the Spirit, producing tangible love, joy, unshakable peace, extreme patience, and kindness.
So it is about character, not just tasks.
Right? It means becoming genuinely useful to the flourishing of others, promoting the healing of your community, and acting as a conduit for truth. The critical mechanism here is the flow of sap. The life-giving grace and spiritual vitality flow exclusively from the root up through the trunk and into the branches.
And Jesus is ruthlessly blunt about the physics of this relationship. He says, abide in me and I in you. As the branch can't bear fruit by itself unless it remains in the vine, so neither can you unless you remain in me. Apart from me, you can do nothing.
The operative word is abiding. Remaining.
Maintaining the connection. If you take a pair of shears and sever a branch from a vine, the leaves might stay green for a day or two. It might look alive to the casual observer, but fundamentally, biologically, it is a corpse. It has been cut off from the only source of vitality.
The union is absolute, and the agricultural reality is severe. Branches that refuse to abide, that produce no fruit, are eventually removed by the farmer. They wither and they are gathered to be burned. It is a stark warning about the reality of spiritual stagnation.
I can intellectually grasp the concept of dead wood being cleared out. But we have to tackle the other half of this metaphor because it introduces a concept that causes immense psychological distress. Jesus says, every branch that bears fruit, he prunes that it may bear more fruit. So let us map this out. I am doing the right thing, I am abiding, I am actively producing the fruit of love and patience, and my reward for this successful growth is that the farmer comes at me with a razor-sharp knife and cuts me.
It sounds incredibly harsh when you put it that way.
It does. It is incredibly difficult for a human being in the midst of suffering to tell the difference between being pruned for growth and being cut off as a punishment. This hits on the oldest, most agonizing question of the human experience. Why do people who are trying to do good still suffer immense pain?
That is the crucial bleeding edge of this entire discourse. And understanding the actual practice of ancient viticulture provides profound clarity here. Let's look at the specific Greek word used for pruning, kathaire. It means to cleanse, to purge, to purify. When a master vine dresser approaches a healthy fruit-bearing branch, he does not hack at it blindly out of anger or retribution. He approaches it with meticulous, calculated care.
But the mechanism of care still involves severing something. It still causes trauma to the plant.
Yes, it involves the knife. But why? Because a grapevine naturally wants to produce luxuriant, sprawling growth. It wants to produce massive, beautiful leaves and long, winding shoots to capture sunlight and outcompete the plants around it. But those sprawling shoots are essentially parasites.
Really, they hurt the plant.
Yes, they drain the sap. They consume the energy of the vine without ever producing a single grape. If left to its own devices, a vine will look spectacular and leafy, but its fruit will be sparse and bitter. In human psychology, that superfluous growth is our ego. It is our obsession with status, our accumulation of wealth, our addiction to comfortable routines, or the pride we take in our own perceived righteousness.
Wow.
Those things look impressive to the outside world, but they actively drain our spiritual vitality.
So the farmer cuts away the very things we are most proud of, the things we think are making us look successful, because they're actually stunting our ultimate purpose.
Exactly. The removal of that growth is agonizing. Losing an identity marker, a level of comfort or material security, hurts deeply. But the text provides a radical reframing of that pain. This discipline is not retributive punishment. It is an act of deep investment. The intent of the farmer is to channel all of your life energy into producing a richer, more enduring yield. The dead branch is removed because it is lifeless. The living branch is pruned precisely because it is loved and possesses immense potential.
That reframing is a lifeline. If you are listening to this and you are in the middle of a painful season, a career setback, a relational loss, a stripping away of your comfort, can you shift your perspective? What if the pain you are experiencing isn't the universe punishing you? What if you are actively being pruned? What if a meticulous, caring gardener is systematically removing the superficial, energy-draining attachments in your life so that your character can produce something of lasting, monumental value?
That internal reframing is absolutely essential for survival, because Jesus immediately pivots to warn them that while the internal world is being refined, the external world is going to become violently hostile. The internal growth of this fruit will inevitably cause severe external friction.
Which brings us to the starkest warning of the night. Jesus does not sugarcoat the future. He does not promise them that their newfound internal gyroscope will manifest as health, wealth, and popularity. He promises them the exact opposite. He says in chapter 15, if the world hates you, you know that it has hated me before it hated you. If they persecuted me, they will also persecute you. And he gets terrifyingly specific in chapter 16. He tells them they will be excommunicated from the synagogues, and worse, the time is coming that whoever kills you will think that he offers service to God.
The historical reality of what these men are about to face cannot be overstated. They're going to be hunted. They will face excommunication, which in a deeply religious society meant total social and economic isolation. And the most psychologically devastating part is the motivation of their enemies. Their persecutors won't just be sadists. They will be highly religious people who genuinely believe that executing these disciples is a righteous act of worship.
That is just chilling.
It is. When Jesus talks about the world here, he isn't talking about the physical planet. He is talking about the entrenched systems of power, ego, and exploitation that govern human societies. He is warning them in advance so that the shock of it won't shatter their faith. Their radical love, their insistence on serving the lowest, and their refusal to play the zero-sum games of power make them a direct existential threat to the world's operating system. The empire has no choice but to try and crush them.
But he doesn't just leave them with a prediction of doom and tell them to grit their teeth. He offers them a profound promise regarding the nature of their suffering. He tells them their sorrow will be actively transmuted into joy. And he uses a very specific, visceral biological analogy to explain how this works.
Yes, in chapter 16, verse 21, he uses the analogy of childbirth. He says, a woman, when she gives birth, has sorrow because her time has come. But when she has delivered the child, she doesn't remember the anguish anymore for the joy that a human being is born into the world.
Such a powerful image.
It is a brilliant mechanism for understanding suffering. The pain of labor is intense, it is unavoidable, and in the apex of the moment, the physical trauma feels like it might consume you. But it is fundamentally productive pain. It is the exact opposite of meaningless, destructive suffering. The pain is actively producing new life. And the biological and psychological reality of holding that new life generates a joy so overwhelming that it permanently alters your relationship to the memory of the anguish.
Productive pain, that connects perfectly back to the mechanism of the pruning shears. The suffering has a definitive endpoint, and it has a purpose. And because of that underlying reality, Jesus is able to offer them a state of mind that the empire cannot comprehend. He says, peace I leave with you, my peace I give to you. Not as the world gives, I give to you. And he summarizes the entire discourse by saying, I have told you these things so that in me you may have peace. In this world you will have trouble. But take heart, I have overcome the world.
Think about the contrast in how peace is manufactured. When the world, whether that is the Roman Empire then or modern society now, offers peace, it does so by attempting to remove the conflict. It offers a temporary ceasefire, a distraction, an evasion of trouble, or it enforces peace through overwhelming military dominance.
Right. Peace through superior firepower.
Exactly. But the peace Christ gives operates independently of the environment. He explicitly guarantees that the trouble will remain. The peace is found in the midst of the chaos. because it is anchored in the fact that the ultimate victory over death and systemic evil has already been secured.
To really visualize this, I think about the concept of cognitive decoupling or a flow state in high-stakes environments. Imagine a highly trained paramedic working in the back of an ambulance during a massive crisis. The external world is pure chaos. Sirens blaring, people screaming, the vehicle swerving. But internally, the paramedic is in a state of absolute decoupled calm. They are locked into a protocol they trust implicitly. Their peace isn't reliant on the sirens turning off. Their peace is derived from their connection to a system that transcends the immediate noise. That is the peace Jesus is leaving them. It is an internalized, unshakable reality, completely insulated from the external hurricane.
And that requires a massive shift in how we process our daily lives. If you are waiting for your external circumstances to perfectly align before you allow yourself to experience peace, if you're waiting for the economy to stabilize or your boss to change or your family to stop arguing, you're going to spend your entire life in a state of agitation. True resilient peace is an internal victory. You can be surrounded by tribulation, experiencing genuine sorrow, yet simultaneously anchored in a profound, quiet joy.
Which brings us to the breathtaking cinematic conclusion of this entire night. After spending hours painstakingly equipping his friends with these new mental models, Jesus does something remarkable in chapter 17. He stops talking to the disciples. He physically lifts his eyes upward and he begins speaking directly to God. This chapter is universally known as the high priestly prayer.
And the tone of it is incredible. You have to remember, he is literally hours away from a brutal arrest, a sham trial, and the agonizing asphyxiation of a Roman cross. In that scenario, human instinct would dictate a desperate plea for escape, or perhaps a furious curse calling down fire on his enemies.
That is what I would do.
Most of us would. But the prayer contains zero panic and zero malice. It is structured with immense purpose. First, he prays for himself, asking to be glorified, so that he could perfectly reflect the Father's glory, noting that he has fully accomplished the work he was sent to do. Second, he prays specifically for the 11 men sitting in the room. He asks that they would be protected from the evil one, and that they would be sanctified, made holy and resilient through the truth of God's word. But it is the third phase of the prayer that breaks the boundaries of time and extends to the present day.
Yes, in verse 20, he shifts his gaze forward through history. He says, "Not for these only do I pray, but for those also who will believe in me through their word." He is actively praying for everyone down the timeline of humanity who will ever align with this path. He is praying for you, the listener, right now. And out of everything he could possibly ask for the future of humanity, he doesn't ask for wealth. He doesn't ask for political dominance. He doesn't ask for an easy life. His ultimate desperate prayer is for absolute unity. He prays that they may all be one, even as you, Father, are in me and I in you, that they also may be one in us, that the world may believe that you sent me.
If we look at the sociology of religion and human group dynamics, Jesus is making unity the ultimate apologetic. He is making it the final, undeniable proof of his message. But we have to be very precise about the mechanism of this unity. This is not a plea for institutional uniformity. He isn't praying that his followers will become a monolith of identical clones wearing the same clothes, voting the same way, and holding the exact same cultural preferences.
Right, he isn't praying for a Borg-like assimilation where individual personality is erased.
Exactly the opposite. He prays they will be one, as the Father and the Son are one. In theological terms, the Father and Son are distinct persons, yet they share a perfect unity of purpose, essence, and self-giving love. True spiritual unity is a symphony of different instruments playing the same underlying chord, not a single note played on a synthesizer.
I love that analogy.
This stands in stark contrast to how the world operates. In the world system, glory and status are zero-sum games. If I get the promotion, you lose it. If my political party wins, yours loses. Because of that, the default state of humanity is constant, fractured tribalism and competition. But the spiritual glory Christ shares with his followers is non-zero sum. The more grace and love you experience, the more I benefit.
And the stated purpose of this unity is entirely outward-facing. He prays for this unity that the world may believe. This reveals a terrifying truth about how we represent this message. Division, infighting, and bitterness actively destroy the credibility of the message, but unity proves it. When an outside observer looks at a community and sees people from vastly different socioeconomic backgrounds, different races, and different political leanings, people who naturally should have nothing to do with each other, actively serving each other, washing each other's feet, and practicing radical self-denying love well, that observer is forced to conclude that something supernatural is occurring. The unity is the proof of the resurrection.
The stakes couldn't be higher. In this same prayer, Jesus defines eternal life. He says, "This is eternal life, that they should know you, the only true God, and him whom you sent." Eternal life isn't just a limitless duration of time. It is a quality of existence derived from intimately knowing the Creator. And how do we prove to the world that we actually know the Creator? By how tenaciously we fight to remain united with each other. If our communities are fractured, vindictive, and constantly splitting over minor grievances, we are actively contradicting the very essence of the eternal life we claim to possess.
So as we pull all of these threads together, the diagnostic question for your own life becomes unavoidable. Look at your daily actions. Look at your interpersonal conflicts. Look at the way you speak about people you disagree with. Are your actions actively contributing to the messy, beautiful, sacrificial unity of your community? Are you building bridges based on shared spiritual purpose? Or are you feeding the world's default operating system of outrage, tribalism, and division? Jesus' final agonizing prayer before facing the cross was that you would remain deeply connected to your brothers and sisters. The way you interact with others tomorrow is your answer to that prayer.
It is a mirror that demands absolute honesty.
Yeah.
But it brilliantly synthesizes the entire night. The shocking humility of the foot washing, the impossible standard of the new commandment, the painful mechanism of the pruning, and the internal gyroscope of peace. They all culminate in the creation of this unified, resilient community. A community designed to reflect the exact nature of God to a world that is completely lost in the dark.
It is a complete architectural redesign of the human heart. And that is the final thought I want to leave you with. Throughout these 5 incredibly dense, intimate chapters, Jesus does not just tweak the edges of their philosophy, he redefines the core vocabulary of human existence. We walked into that upper room thinking power was about sitting at the head of the table and giving orders. He redefines ultimate leadership as getting on your knees and doing the dirtiest job in the room. We thought love was treating people with basic fairness. He redefines love as a willingness to absorb betrayal and lay down your life. We thought suffering was proof that we were being punished. He redefines pain as the meticulous, loving pruning of a master gardener designed to maximize our potential. We thought peace was the absence of a storm. He redefines peace as an unshakable internal gyroscope anchored in his ultimate victory, entirely independent of the chaos outside. The challenge of this text isn't just to intellectually agree with these concepts as beautiful ancient poetry. The challenge is to actually let the Paraclete, the spirit of truth, rewire the operational mechanics of your daily life.
It really is an invitation to an entirely new way of being human.
That's the heart of this section. This is wisdom for the present, where understanding leads to clarity, and clarity shapes how we see and live. We'll see you in the next episode.